Let me tell you something you probably won't believe at first. My entire neighborhood, 3 generations of sweat and heartbreak, nearly got stolen out from under me by a smiling woman with a fake red seal and a handshake colder than a Chicago winter. But you know what? Sometimes the universe hands you a shovel and dares you to start digging for justice. Yeah, that happened. My name's Frank Miller, and I'm 62 long enough in the tooth to have seen my share of fools and bullies, but I thought I'd hung up my gloves for good after Martha died. My wife, God rest her, used to call our old lakefront cabin her piece of heaven. My grandfather built it after the war. My dad stretched it out with a wraparound porch in the 70s, and I spent the last 5 years turning 1,500 wild, half-forgotten acres next door into something Martha would have been proud of, a patchwork of trails, wildflowers, and if you want to get sentimental, dreams. But this story ain't sentimental. Not at first. One Tuesday morning, September cool enough for your breath to show, my golden retriever Bull starts barking his head off at the door. I figured it was Mrs. Henderson snooping around again, or maybe a raccoon looking for easy trash. But when I stepped out, mug in hand, what I saw was a bright yellow sign pounded right into the heart of those acres, land sold. Contact Pinnacle Development. My hand slipped. The mug hit the steps and shattered like 5 years of sweat and Martha's memory getting swept out with the garbage. But here's the real gut punch. I'd overheard the whole thing going down the night before. Yeah, thanks to a paranoid neighbor, Jim Peterson, who swore the HOA was bugging him. I'd stumbled onto a forgotten listening device outside the clubhouse and caught Karen Smithfield herself, Queen Bee of the HOA, laughing about how she'd finally get rid of that old fool Miller and make real money off the land. I'd recorded every word standing there in my pajamas, handshaking, swearing I'd see this thing through. But that morning, all I saw was Karen herself, standing on my porch, waving a document with a phony red seal, grinning like she'd already won the war. "You lost, old man?" The paper looked official enough to fool someone who hadn't spent 30 years as a structural engineer, but I knew better. Still, the sign was there. The deal done, 1,500 acres, years of work gone with one stroke of a pen. I felt the ground drop out from under me for a second. I almost let it go. Almost. Bull barked and Mrs. Henderson popped up out of nowhere, phone in hand, ready to catch me face planting in the mud when I tried to yank that sign out myself. "This is going straight on Facebook," she cheered, snapping away while I looked like an idiot wrestling a post set deeper than my grandfather's fence lines. Within an hour, my humiliation was up to 37 comments and a dozen shares. Frank Miller's having a moment, thoughts and prayers. Thanks, neighbors. But the sting burned me clean, burned away the last bit of fear, left nothing but steel. So I cleaned up, threw on Martha's favorite flannel. She always said it made me look distinguished, and called the number on that sign. Pinnacle Development picked up Jake Morrison, voice slicker than motor oil, told me I had 30 days to get off the land or face $200,000 in legal fees. That wasn't a threat. That was a declaration of war. "Nothing personal, just business," he said, like that made it better. You ever walk into a place and know you're trespassing on somebody's ego? That's the Willowbrook HOA office, all beige and fluorescent and smelling like stale coffee and lost hope. Karen ruled the place, perched at her desk behind a wall of laminated violations and color-coded maps of neighborhood offenders. Beside her, Maggie, the secretary, scribbled every word like she was documenting for the FBI, and Bob, the treasurer, sat in the corner with a sack of money tapping his calculator like it was a slot machine. Karen tried to bulldoze me with more fake authority, unanimous board resolution, community benefit, the drill. Except their meeting was 3 folks at a bar scribbling on a napkin and stamping it with a seal she bought online for $12. She hit me with a $500 fine for unauthorized improvement of community assets. In other words, planting Martha's garden and clearing trash. Bob licked his lips at the mention of money, and Maggie wanted me to spell my own last name for her records. It would have been funny if it weren't so damn crooked. As I left, Karen called it after me, sugary as pie. "You have until Friday to pay Fred. Have a blessed day." She's called me Fred for 8 years, never once gotten it right. Dominance games. But her act was too rehearsed. She knew she was over the line. That's when it hit me. If I could dig deep enough, I'd find something they missed. Cue the cavalry. Tommy Jang, a young lawyer in town who still smelled like law school and ramen noodles. He jumped at the case, maybe out of pity, maybe because nobody else would touch it. Together we drove to the county land office run by Margaret Kowalski, a woman who could spot a missing comma from 50 yards and hadn't lost a document since the Reagan administration. She found it. That land was Conservation Class B, could only be sold by the county with a 75% resident vote. The HOA zero legal authority. Karen's sale was more illegal than a $3 bill. But there's more. Margaret also found forged signatures, blue ink instead of black. Karen's Smithfield properties skimming public land maintenance fees off the books for years, $423,000 missing. The final blow. A forgotten 1995 bylaw buried in the original HOA docs. If the board violated state law, management authority shifted to the first legitimate complainant. That meant by the book I could become HOA president if I challenged her in court. We filed suit. Tommy with his whole future riding on this and me with nothing left to lose. Karen lawyered up with Mason and Associates, a Shark Tank if ever there was one. Marble floors, $800 an hour fees, and enough legal tricks to bankrupt an oil company. She hit me with countersuits, painted me as a grieving widower gone mad, and held a community support rally that drew 3 people and a stray dog. Public opinion wasn't exactly on her side. Then Detective Ray Morales got involved, old friend of the family, Army vet, ex-cop with a nose for scams. He dug into Karen's background. North Carolina insurance fraud, quiet settlements, a trail of grift and vanished money. Meanwhile, Pinnacle's Jake Morrison, he of the BMW and perfect haircut, showed up at my door, spread his luxury resort plans all over my table, and offered to let me rent my own cabin for $200 a month, plus a clause for Bull, my dog, as long as he didn't interfere with resort operations. I soaked his fancy suit with my garden hose. Sorry, Jake, old hands and all that. But the real twist came when Tommy and Ray pulled an all-nighter at the archives. Turns out Karen had secretly negotiated a sale of every house in the neighborhood. 47 families slated for eviction so Pinnacle could bulldoze it all for a mega resort. And get this, she botched her own address on the paperwork and accidentally sold her neighbor's house instead of her own. Mrs. Patterson, sweet lady, got a stack of real estate mail she didn't ask for. Karen exempted her own property, except she'd put down elm instead of pine. You can't make this stuff up. Court day came. Judge Williams presiding, no nonsense, seen it all before. Karen arrived flanked by 4 attorneys. I walked in with Tommy, Ray, and a mountain of evidence. Tommy laid it all out. The illegal sale, the embezzled fees, the fake signatures, the 1995 bylaw, the Wisconsin statute that said a violator forfeited control to the first legitimate challenger. The judge read the law, checked the documents, and after 20 minutes turned to the courtroom and said, "Mr. Frank Miller is now the legally appointed manager of the Willowbrook Community HOA." The bailiff handed me the keys. Karen went red, then purple, then white, and the gallery nearly burst. Karen shrieked about conspiracies. Judge Williams told her she was now just resident number 47 and subject to the new rules. Ray handed over a tape of Karen bragging about playing these country idiots and planning her $2 million Florida retirement. The judge's face turned to stone. Karen lunged for the keys, got dragged out by security, and Bob and Maggie bolted before I could appoint them to my new Department of Community Waste Management. The judge voided every Pinnacle contract. Karen's entire house of cards collapsed in public. The next morning, I tore down Karen's wall of shame, threw out 247 rules, and hung a sign that read, "Common sense rules. Be kind. Keep up your place. Mind your business." First meeting, everyone showed up, even Karen hiding behind sunglasses in the back row. I cut HOA dues to $50 except Karen's, which stayed at $200 plus a $300 administrative misconduct fee. The room loved it. But the real moment facing Karen repeating her words back. "You lost, old man." I asked her in front of everyone who exactly lost here. She didn't answer, just slumped in her chair. I made her repaint her house pink. The world doesn't always hand out poetic justice, but sometimes you get to watch the person who tried to ruin your life scrubbing mud off your own front step because a judge told her to. Karen got probation, community service, cleaning up the land she tried to sell, and court-ordered restitution. Tommy's business took off. He's still fighting HOAs across the county. Ray became head of community security, mostly keeping Karen from stirring up new trouble. The conservation land became Martha's Memorial Garden, funded by the Karen Smithfield Memorial Restitution Fund. Sunflowers everywhere, just how Martha wanted it. You want to know the final twist I knew about that bylaw from day one. 30 years as an engineer, you learn to read every line. But if I'd used it too soon, Karen would have gotten off easy. I let her dig her own grave, made sure justice came full circle. 6 months later, Karen was renting a studio apartment carved out of her old HOA meeting room, paying me $600 a month and needing written approval to plant tomatoes. Last week, Jake Morrison from Pinnacle called with a business proposal. I just laughed, looking out over the lake that'll never be a resort as long as I'm breathing. I'm listening, Jake, but we play by my rules. Land isn't just dirt, it's family, it's freedom. It's the promise you keep for the people who came before and the ones who come after. No bully, no crooked deal, no slick lawyer can take that away from folks who stand up together. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Ever fought a battle you thought you couldn't win? Drop your own HOA horror stories in the comments. Is justice alive where you live, or are there still too many Karens running the show? I'd love to hear from you. And if this story made you smile or mad or ready to fight for what's right, stick around. Because sometimes the old dog's got one more trick left, and it's the one nobody sees coming.